What's happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Facemask Fantasy. Hope everybody's had a good week. Another summer weekend is close. Hopefully, however you're spending it is fun or relaxing or some combination of the two. Whatever you prefer. Got some more rankings for you guys today. We're going to do the wide receivers 13 to 24. We covered the top 12, my top 12 anyway, wide receivers for the 2023 season for redraft leagues on Tuesday. You can check that out. I did already slice one video up for that. That ran yesterday. Breaking a bit from, I think, the consensus, I did have Cooper Kupp as my top wide receiver. I shared my thoughts on that. Not just in the stream on Tuesday, but you can check the video out on the channel if you feel so inclined. But today we have the wide receiver 2. So there's definitely more of a conversation there as far as personal preference. There's going to be a little bit more break from the consensus there. Generally speaking, when you're at the top of the rankings, people have the same names in there. It's just a matter of the order, the wide receiver 2s, and then running back 2s, quarterback 2s, and then as we creep into the third tier of the position groups is when the conversation, I think, really starts to get going, really starts to ramp up. So we will discuss that today. If you missed the Tuesday stream, a very quick recap, in case you're wondering, where's this guy's name? Because he's not going to come up today. My wide receiver 1s in order were Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, A.J. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, Chris Olave, Jalen Waddle. Those were the top 12. So I got 13 to 24 today. There was a lot to talk about outside of the rankings on Tuesday. I did a fair amount of discussion about the running back landscape. We were much closer to the fallout of Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs having not signed their franchise tags. I have that part of the Tuesday live stream time-stamped. You can hear my thoughts on that. Not too much in the way of other updates or developments since then. Of course, more teams, more veterans are starting to report to training camp. We're pretty close to full swing for training camp as a whole. This week, not too much in the news. I mean, there was a trade that happened yesterday. The Detroit Lions acquired wide receiver Denzel Mims from the New York Jets. And on top of that, a late-round pick swap completed the deal. So that was the big barn burner of yesterday. I'm going to go ahead and just say that that's a nothing burger. That's just to give the Lions some depth until Jameson Williams returns from his 6-week suspension. I am not putting Denzel Mims on my radar in any format. Fresh start for him, so that's probably something that he needed at this point in his career, but just hasn't done anywhere close to enough to warrant any type of consideration for redraft or best ball or keeper leagues or anything like that. He's only on he's only on dynasty rosters in leagues that roster 30 or 35 different players. The one positive piece of news that did come out in the past 48 hours, we talked about how Isaiah Pacheco, there was a headline that went down on Tuesday that indicated that Isaiah Pacheco could start the season on the PUP list. There was an outside chance that he could start the season on the PUP list. That would force him to miss the first 6 weeks of the season. He spoke to reporters today and said that he's 100% guaranteed going to be out there for the season opener for the Kansas City Chiefs when they open up their Super Bowl defense, I believe on September 7th against the Detroit Lions. So good news for Pacheco. So any type of hype train surrounding Clyde Edwards-Helaire or Deneric Prince, that lasted all of about a day, if that. Sounds like Pacheco expects to be out there for week 1. I think that's about it. Of course, there was like a negative headline earlier today. We'll, of course, allow this situation to play out, but Vikings wide receiver Jordan Addison was cited by police driving pretty much like 3 times any potential legal speeding limit, or at least twice the speeding limit, going 140 miles per hour in a 55 mile per hour zone. So yeah, that's almost triple the speed limit in that specific area where he was driving. I don't know if a speeding ticket will result in any type of disciplinary action, but 140 miles per hour is just straight up reckless. If you're not a NASCAR driver or some F1 driver in some actual legitimate competition, I mean, you're an idiot going 140 miles per hour. That's just stupid. That's just reckless. Not sure a speeding ticket warrants any type of disciplinary action from the NFL itself, but we'll see how that plays out. I mean, yeah. If you're Jordan Addison, I mean, it's like, come on, dude, don't throw away the opportunity of a lifetime by being an idiot. So we'll of course, monitor that one in the coming days, or it might be coming weeks. The NFL can sometimes take their time with these types of things if they choose to act upon this or not. We will see. It doesn't change anything as far as his stock one way or another, whether it's in a dynasty draft or in a redraft. Nothing changes there, but he is an idiot for this. Let's call a spade a spade. I think that about does it. Not too many other talking points that developed between Tuesday and today. Again, I will be off next week from live streams. I will be traveling for work, but I will be still getting videos out over the course of the next 10, 14 days to keep you guys covered. And I'm, of course, available in Discord when I can. For my All-Pro members, which I think there's 4 or 5 of, you will get early access to my draft plan. I will be putting that together during the time off. That will be something that I will be utilizing the time for, is getting my draft plan together. It will release to everybody later in August. I expect to have it over to my All-Pro members. Hopefully in the next week or so. I'm aiming for the next 7 to 10 days, so they can get an early access look to it, and then it will be released to everybody else a couple of weeks after that. So that's all I have for that. We can go ahead and just jump right into the rankings now. There weren't too many talking points to go through like there were on Tuesday. So wide receivers 13 to 24. I will, of course, make sure to answer any questions in the chat as they come up. Alex, good to see you, man. Hopefully there's a way for you to be able to tune in or listen in if possible. But appreciate you coming in and hanging out anyway. So my wide receiver 13 to kick off the wide receiver 2s for the 2023 season is Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver T. Higgins. His running mate, Jamar Chase, is my wide receiver 3. Higgins is only 10 spots lower, is my wide receiver 13 on the season. Talked about this a little bit on Tuesday. Obviously, Jamar Chase is the unquestioned wide receiver 1 for Cincinnati, but T. Higgins is a pretty damn good plan B to turn to if you're Joe Burrow on a play-per-play basis. He would be a wide receiver 1 on 18, 19 other teams in the NFL, maybe 20 other teams in the NFL. He's on that level. I think it's fair to say, and he's brings some pretty rock solid consistency to the position. Finished as a wide receiver 2, more of like a mid-level-ish wide receiver 2 in fantasy points per game. He finished as the wide receiver 17 overall in half PPR. I'm going to use half PPR scoring as the default template to lean on as far as information. Wide receiver 17 on the season. I think he was the wide receiver 16 in fantasy points per game. Higgins was. He was a little hot and cold, little up and down last year, but for the most part was very rock solid. He was only under 10 half PPR points, I think 3 or 4 times. Once in week 1, 3.7 points. Week 6, 7.7 points. Week 9, just missed 10 points, 9.5, not bad. And then 1.8 points in week 17. That was the Monday night game that got canceled, so that one doesn't count. But he did only have 1.2 half PPR points in week 18. So for those who have your fantasy championships, week 18, he did lay an egg that week. So 4 times, excluding the week 17 Monday night matchup that ultimately got canceled, 4 times he was under double-digit half PPR points. Other than that, he was pretty much giving you what you were hoping for on a week-to-week basis. 16 half PPR points scored week 2, 11.8 week 3, 21.9 in week 4. Very good. He did not play week 5, missed that game. I already mentioned 7.7 week 6, 11.8 week 7, 12.4 week 8, just under 10 week 9. Week 9. Week 10 was his bye week. 19.3 points scored in week 11, 20.9 points scored week 12. Nice little 2-game stretch there. 11 points week 13. He missed week 14. And then weeks 15 and 16, the first 2 weeks of the fantasy playoffs for most leagues, 13.8 week 15, 22.8 week 16. It's a pretty good season for a team's number 2 wide receiver. Went over 20 half PPR points 4 times. I'm including the 19.3. He just missed it. So some real upper echelon wide receiver 1 outputs that week. And then, other than that, was giving you anywhere from 12 to 16 points in the other, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 weeks he was in like the 12 to 16 point range. He gave you 19 to 22 points 4 other times. So 10 weeks out of a possible, 16, which include 2 games missed and a bye week, he was giving you upper echelon wide receiver 2 outputs at least. Catching passes from Joe Burrow. He's a rock solid, safe player to take at the back half of the second round. Ja'Marr Chase did miss 4 games last year. It should be noted. Weeks 8, 9, 11, and 12. Week 10 was the bye week. Those weeks, Higgins had 2 really good weeks, weeks 11 and 12, 19 and 20 points scored, 19 and 21 points scored, I should say, and 2 so-so weeks. 12 points scored week 8, 9.5 points scored week 9. So half of his performances with Ja'Marr Chase were a little more inflated. Half of his games without Ja'Marr Chase were kind of around his average, or what you would at least expect from a player like T. Higgins. So it's tough to say one way or another whether Ja'Marr Chase being out of the lineup hurts or helps Higgins one way or another. He's a rock solid upper echelon wide receiver 2 with wide receiver 1 upside any given week. It's not going to happen, of course, every single week, especially when Chase is healthy. But we saw Higgins perform 3 wide receiver 1 performances, even when Ja'Marr Chase was in the lineup, and still giving you strong wide receiver 2 production that you could lean on when Ja'Marr Chase played. In that offense, where we expect them to sling it, we expect the Bengals to throw the ball significantly more than they run it. when you have a collection of Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins. That is an offense that you expect to be one of the elite upper echelon offenses in the league. You could probably say that you expect them to have a top 5 or 6 finish as far as complete production expected from that type of trio. We're always going to, of course, give a little bit more love. We're going to push up a little bit more a team's bona fide wide receiver 1. But when you're a type of player like T. Higgins, where you can definitively say, without any type of debate, that you put him on 20 other rosters and he is that team's wide receiver 1, you feel comfortable taking an upper echelon passing attacks wide receiver 2 at the back half of the second round. That's where T. Higgins is going. I think his ADP is around 22-ish, maybe a little less than that. Or excuse me, a little lower than that, maybe in the 23, 24 range. If you're at the turn, the 2-3 turn, which means you had a high pick in the first round, he's a guy you can regularly rely on being there. And he's a guy that I'm going to advocate taking over some of the running backs that are also going in that range. He's safe. He's in a great situation. He's on a great offense. I got T. Higgins as my wide receiver 13 overall. My first wide receiver 2 just missed the crack for the cut, for wide receiver 1s. He gives you wide receiver 1 upside any given week. My wide receiver 14 is a guy who's getting drafted over T. Higgins, so I do prefer Higgins over him, but still excellent, still attached to a great offense. We continue to expect big things from him. DeVonta Smith is my wide receiver 14 for the 2022 season. Again, just like T. Higgins, he is a guy that could be a team's wide receiver 1. Will have his wide receiver 1 weeks, but with A.J. Brown in Philly as the clear-cut wide receiver 1, at least for now, Smith is the team's wide receiver 2. So he will take a back seat. I think it's fair to say more often than not to A.J. Brown, but that doesn't mean that he can't outperform A.J. Brown any given week. And there were several weeks last year where he did. 95 catches, which is awesome. 95 catches for a wide receiver 2 is damn good. 1,196 yards, almost 1,200 receiving yards, and 7 touchdowns for a total of 207 half PPR points in 2022. Smith did get a little bit of a boost last year because Dallas Goedert missed, I believe, 5 game boost there as far as targets and production. But nevertheless, this is a great offense. Probably, I think it's fair to say, one of the top 2 offenses in the conference in the NFC. Maybe, you could argue the NFL as a whole, but in the NFC, the Eagles have a top 2 or 3 offense in that conference. You expect them to light up the scoreboard with an elite offensive line. Jalen Hurts took massive strides forward as a passer last year, at the quarterback position in general. So that boosts DeVonta Smith. What could potentially hold him back is a full healthy season of Dallas Goedert. So maybe you don't necessarily see 95 catches again, 1,200 yards again, but still. This is an offense like the Bengals. You expect big things from the Eagles with Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, and DeVonta Smith. Smith finished as a wide receiver 1 overall, but he was the wide receiver 18 in points per game. The goose egg week 1 certainly didn't help his average. That obviously was a very weird outlier. You never expect a 0 from wide receivers of DeVonta Smith's caliber, but it did happen last year in week 1. He did not catch a pass. He, of course corrected very nicely for the rest of the season. 11 and a half PPR points week 2. He blew up week 3, 26.9 points. 3.2 week 4, so not good. 13.7, 12.9 in weeks 5 and 6, respectively. So still giving you double-digit half PPR scoring. The Eagles' bye week was week 7 last year. Came out of that with a couple of dud games, 4.8 half PPR points, 3.2 half PPR points in weeks 8 and 9, respectively. So you might have been feeling kind of icky about DeVonta Smith through the first 9 weeks of the season last year because he gave you four of those 9 games. He was under 5 half PPR points with a goose egg week 1. But then he turned it on. If you by chance happened to be somebody who bought low on DeVonta Smith in week 10, you were probably doing cartwheels for the rest of the season. Because from that stretch, that was also, I think, the stretch where Dallas Goedert missed a stretch of time and DeVonta Smith really started to produce. 10.9 half PPR points week 10, 10.8 week 11, only 7 week 12, but 18.7 week 13, 14.9 half PPR points week 14, 15 half PPR points scored week 15, 27.3 week 16, 16 in week 17, and if you happened to play week 18 championships in your fantasy league, he gave you 10.2 points in the last game of the season, where I believe the Eagles, Jalen Hurts played that game, but it was his first game back from the shoulder injury that he suffered in week 15. So even without Jalen Hurts in week 16 and week 17, DeVonta Smith still delivered for you with actually in week 16, his best performance of the season as far as fantasy points scored. So he was under 10 half PPR points 5 times. It's about what you would probably expect from a wide receiver 2. There were several wide receiver 1s who had 3 or 4 dud performances. These guys are human, after all. But other than that, pretty rock solid. Played the entire season, gave you a 17-game stretch where you knew you could rely on him, or you knew you could at least plug him into your lineup. Let's put it that way. He didn't miss a game due to injury. 12 of those 17 games, he was over 10 half PPR points on the season. It's pretty damn consistent. Again, we don't project goose eggs. You're never ever going to project a wide receiver of this caliber in this conversation from wide receiver 1 down to wide receiver 24. You're never going to project that any one of them ever has a no-show, for lack of a better term, where they goose egg that week. They don't record a catch. They don't record any stats. It's just not something. It's a statistical outlier. It's not something that you prepare for or expect. So that brought Smith's average down a little bit, down to the wide receiver 18 in fantasy points per game. So even though he had a wide receiver 1 finish on the season as a whole, he was more of a mid-range wide receiver 2 in fantasy points per game. I think it's fair to expect that kind of stays where it is. So maybe wide receiver 14 is a little high for DeVonta Smith, admittedly. But I'm willing to put him here because of the situation he is in. 1, he's an excellent talent. You just can't take that away from him. And 2, he's in what we expect, again, to be one of the top 5 or 6 offenses, top 5 to 7 offenses in the league in Philadelphia. Attached to Jalen Hurts, across from A.J. Brown. You expect DeVonta Smith's numbers to be rock solidly consistent. He did that for the most part on the season as far as being available last year. And especially in the second half of the season in the stretch run, he gave you some rock solid consistency. So wide receiver 18 in fantasy points per game, that might be where he ultimately settles in, especially with a healthy Dallas Goedert, presumably for a 17-game stretch. So again, I will maybe suggest that the wide receiver 14 is a little lofty of a ranking for him, but he put it together last year to the tune of the wide receiver 10 overall finish. So we'll go ahead and split that difference, right? Wide receiver 10 on the season, wide receiver 18 in fantasy points per game. Let's give him the wide receiver 14 ranking. We expect him, once again, to put up a high-end wide receiver 2 performance on the season with low-end wide receiver 1 upside any given week. And he should sprinkle in at least 1, maybe 2 top 5, top 7 performances. He did a couple of those last year. So I feel comfortable with that one. What's going on, Patrick? Good to see you, man. I'll give you my 1 through 12 one more time just to run through it real quick, and then I'll keep it moving. I put Cooper Kupp as my wide receiver 1, actually, so he's a little higher for me than he is for you. I did actually slice up that video, and it is on the channel. The specific, my specific part of that segment where I talk about Kupp and I guess my argument, so to speak, for why I have him as my wide receiver 1. If anybody cares to check that out, I have Kupp as my wide receiver 1. Jefferson is my wide receiver 2. Chase is my wide receiver 3. Hill is my wide receiver 4. I have Diggs as my wide receiver 5. A.J. Brown is my wide receiver 6. So we're flip-flopped on 5 and 6. CD is my wide receiver 7. I put Amon-Ra as my wide receiver 8. Garrett Wilson at 9. I put Devontae Adams at 10. I don't like his situation, but out of respect for Devontae Adams, I gave him the top 10. And then I put Olave at 11 and Waddle at 12. And then I got Higgins at 13 and DeVonta Smith at 14 so far today. And yeah, I think it's fair to say that nobody is sneaking. As excellent as Stephon Diggs is and was last year, as excellent as A.J. Brown is and was last year, I'm not sneaking them over any of the top 4 into the top 4. So Higgins at 13, Smith at 14. My wide receiver 15. I think I'm a little higher on this guy. The more I think about it, the more I kind of dissect these names and really look at it. I think I'm becoming a little higher consensus on this guy than others. It's not this random out of nowhere name, but looking at his potential, plus the time that he missed last year, I think factors in a little bit to why his ADP is down a little bit, slightly, compared to last year. 15 is where I have Deebo Samuel. And Deebo's numbers are way down from last year because he missed 4 games, and he had a couple of dud performances when he was playing. But for the most part, the consistency was still there when he was in there. He finished as the wide receiver 38. So I'm not really going to hold that one against him. Again, he missed 4 games, and he was always going to be a candidate for some touchdown regression, everybody's favorite term, right? Touchdown regression. He had 8 rushing touchdowns in 2021. That was never going to be sustainable for a guy who is primarily a wide receiver. I know that, that was a talking point last year. What was Deebo Samuel's contract going to look like? How were they going to structure it? Because he coined that term wide back. So how were the 49ers going to approach contract negotiations? What was Deebo going to be looking for from the perspective of his versatility? They ultimately came to an agreement. They put rushing production incentives into his contract. I don't actually remember if he hit any of them. He may not have because of the time that he missed. Point being, his ADP was significantly inflated last year because of a ridiculous amount of touchdowns scored, and specifically on the ground. 8 rushing touchdowns for a wide receiver who was a part-time backfield player was never going to be sustainable. But where you continue to believe in Deebo is the fact that he is an elite, dynamic yards after the catch monster. And I won't even limit it to yards after the catch. It's yards after the football is in his hands, right? Whether it's in the backfield or he catches it beyond the line of scrimmage or otherwise. You expect Deebo to just straight up make plays. It doesn't matter if it's Trey Lance or Brock Purdy or me as the quarterback. You expect Deebo to he can take a catch in the flat 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage and turn it into an 8-yard gain, 10-yard gain, any given play. He is a yak monster, and that's what is so enticing and exciting about Deebo's potential. So that's why I have him here as the wide receiver 15. And again, you look at the per week production, it was there last year. In half PPR scoring, 11.6. I think he salvaged that one. That was that week 1 monsoon in Chicago. I think he scored like on a short plunge on the goal line that week. Correct me if I'm wrong. So he did get a he did get a rushing touchdown week 1. So it was like, oh my God, here we go again. Deebo's going to score a million touchdowns on the ground as a wide receiver because he's a tank. But of course, as the rest of the season played out, that didn't totally come to fruition. Still, the numbers were pretty much there on a per week basis. 11.6 in week 1, 12.2 half PPR points in week 2, 10.4 week 3, 20.7 week 4, 10.2 week 5. He gave you some real rock solid production the first 5 weeks of the season. It probably didn't feel like it though, because we were drafting him like 14th or 15th overall last year in one quarterback leagues. So that production, as consistent as it was, almost felt like he was shortchanging you a little bit because of how inflated his ADP was. And then 6.9 week 7, he got hurt, missed week 8. Week 9 was the bye week, came out only 6.1 points week 10, 18.9 week 11, and then it was kind of meh for a stretch, right? 5.8 half PPR points week 12, not great. 9.3 week 13, not great. I think this was when like Brock Purdy, I think, got inserted. So that might have had something to do with it. That was when I think Jimmy Garoppolo got hurt and Brock Purdy was inserted. I think it was week 12. Brock Purdy made his first start. So change in offense, right? Pretty much the offense changed a little bit with the third quarterback. So, that could have affected him a little bit. 5.8 week 12, 9.3 half PPR points week 13, 12.4 half PPR points week 14, and then you didn't have him for the fantasy playoffs, which really hurt. He missed weeks 15, 16, and 17 due to injury. He came back week 18 as a tune-up for the playoffs, only put in 3.4 half PPR points for anybody who had a championship match or game in week 18. So, as a result, on the whole, compared to his ADP, Deebo didn't work out last year because he was being drafted. He was a lock in the second round. People were regularly taking him high in the second round. I'm sure you get excited about somebody like that with the versatility that Deebo brings to the position, right? When you got a wide receiver who is built like a running back and can go into the backfield and handle some of that workload, that's enticing, right? That's an exciting. I want to draft that guy. Yeah, he's a guy that I can play at wide receiver who's going to give me some running back production. That's always fun, right? You think about that, it's like, that's exciting. And Deebo's awesome. He's a yak monster. Yeah, I want this player on my team. Sure, I'll spend a top 15 pick on him. But the production was never going to be sustainable, right? 8 rushing touchdowns from a wide receiver is just not ever going to be sustainable. And so relative to his ADP, it felt like he had a down season. And he did have a down season, even by just Deebo Samuel and his standard in general. Finished as the wide receiver 38 overall. You don't expect Deebo to finish as a middling wide receiver 3. So it left you wanting more. Last year, Deebo left you wanting more because we drafted him so high. Now his ADP is down to like 33, 34, 35. You can get him in the middle of the third round in 12-team drafts. That is a price that I am much more willing to pay for Deebo Samuel. I didn't have much Deebo last year. I dabbled here and there just because I always preach, if you play a lot of best ball, to diversify your assets as much as you can. Don't lock in too much on just one player. That's how you can kind of pigeonhole yourself. So I dabbled here and there, but ultimately I wasn't drafting Deebo a ton. Now I'm in. Now I'm drafting him more because his ADP is around 35. You can get him 15, 17, 18 picks later than you could last year. There should be a little bit more stability now. Yes, we're going into the season, I guess, with Brock Purdy as the quarterback. I think maybe I can't even say there's stability with the 49ers yet with their quarterback situation. But presumably it's Brock Purdy. Who knows if Trey Lance gets in there or outperforms Purdy this preseason and forces Kyle Shanahan to have to think about what he wants to do. Regardless, Um, you expect big production from Deebo. Anytime the ball is in his hands, he can turn it into more than what you would maybe expect the average playmaker to turn it into. He's probably the biggest yak monster in the NFL. Now, they did, of course, add Christian McCaffrey, the 49ers did, ahead of the trade deadline. So Deebo's role in the backfield is obviously going to be affected a little bit. But even with McCaffrey, they still sprinkled him in the backfield. They still utilized him here and there. Because the 49ers are also paying part of that contract in part for him to play running back, right? They baked running back production incentives into the contract. So there's still some incentive for the 49ers themselves to get Deebo in the backfield. So it won't be as much as 2021 that we'll see Deebo in the backfield, but he'll still get in there. He'll still get in there to spell Christian McCaffrey. He's kind of like the change of pace guy, so to speak. And then, of course, he's a starting wide receiver. So given his versatility, the reduced cost relative to last year, and when you go under the hood and look at some of the per week production, it's not bad. It's just not top 15 good, which would, maybe what you were hoping or expecting when we drafted Deebo 14th, 15th, 16th overall last year. Now you can draft him 33rd, 34th, 35th. That's a price I'm willing to pay. And on an offense that we expect to be good with the 49ers, no matter who the quarterback is, now I'm willing to buy. Give me Deebo Samuel as my wide receiver 15. So I do think I'm a little higher than on Deebo than maybe some of the consensus, and that's okay. I'm calling my shots. My wide receiver 16 is DK Metcalf. And I think, I'm not that much lower on DK than consensus, but I do think I'm a few spots lower than than the consensus is on DK. His ADP right now is around 28 in one quarterback leagues. So you got to draft him at the top of the third round if you want him. And if you've got the first overall pick and then you've got the 2-3 turn, DK will be there for you, but T. Higgins might be there for you as well, and so will possibly DeVonta Smith. I want both of those guys over DK, so that's not a situation where I'm going to have him too frequently. I would need him to fall to the 304, the 305-ish in that range, and then it's like, yeah, okay, now I'll take him. So not a significant dip, but with an ADP of 28, while I do have shares of DK Metcalf, absolutely. He's a physical specimen. You don't need me to tell you that. But where T. Higgins and DeVonta Smith are getting drafted, and then also the guy I just talked about where Deebo's getting drafted, I have more shares of those guys. So I don't have a ton of DK Metcalf, but I do sprinkle him in here and there in my best ball drafts. Now here's why. DK finished as the wide receiver 18 on the season. So I have him listed as my wide receiver 16. He finished as the wide receiver 18. So I'm actually giving him a slight bump relative to where he finished. The problem, though, is the points per game on a per weekly basis. He was actually just below Deebo Samuel on a per weekly basis. Which was the wide receiver, I think, 27. Yeah, wide receiver 27 or wide receiver 28. So, again, when you actually look at the numbers, yeah, on the season, DK finished as a wide receiver 2 because he played 17 weeks. He played all 17 games. He finished outside of the top 24, though, in fantasy points per game. But he played all 17, so he was able to lock in a wide receiver 2 finish on the season. 5 half PPR points scored week 1, blah. 5.5 points scored week 2, another blah. Then he turned it on for a 3-game stretch. 14.9 in week 3, 18.4 in week 4, 15.3 in week 5. Sick. Awesome. You're feeling good at that point. But then he came back to earth for 2 games. 4.4 in week 6, 1.7 in week 7. I think that was his bottom out week. No, actually it wasn't. But it was close. Only 1.7 half PPR points in week 7. What is that, like a 12-yard catch? Or maybe like 2 catches for 7 yards? Whatever it was, you expect more from DK Metcalf. You expect a lot more from DK Metcalf. But then he put a nice little 3-game stretch together before his bye week. 14.5 points scored in week 8, 12.2 points scored in week 9, 10.1 points scored in week 10. So 14.5, 12.2, 10.1 going into his week 11 bye. So it's like, all right, fine. He's had 6 games out of 9, 6 games out of 10, where he scored double-digit fantasy points. But then he had 4 out of 10 where he was under 6. And 2 of those games he was under 5. Semantics, but also statistics for your guys' awareness. So it's when that's the case, you're probably going into the bye week thinking like, all right, with a guy like DK, I'll take the good with the bad. And that would have, been a thought process that paid dividends coming out of the bye week, because then he delivered for you. 14.5 points scored week 12. His high water mark was week 13, 22.7 points. Great week. And then 15.6, week 14. Nice follow-up. Week 15, 9 points scored. All right. Everybody's human. Just misses 10 half PPR points. Fine. Maybe he didn't help me win the week this week, but maybe he's not, he's not the reason that my team completely underperforms. 9 points, meh. All right, fine. 11.6, week 16, not bad. Where he hurt you was championship week 17. 0.8. 0.8 points scored week 17. Now, just because it happened in week 17, you don't hold anything additional against DK Metcalf when ranking him the following season. Justin Jefferson had a 2-point half PPR outing week 17. That doesn't mean he's not a top 2 wide receiver in the NFL. The timing just sucked. So same deal with DK, 0.8 week 17. That one hurts. If you went into championship week needing something from DK Metcalf, you didn't get it. And then if you play week 18, 5.5. So again, obviously better than 0.8, but not very good. That comes out to the tune of 10.7 half PPR points per week. Good for wide receiver 27, wide receiver 28 finish on a per weekly basis. But because he played all 17, which means you could rely on him every single week other than his bye week, you could fire him up into your lineup without a problem. Because he plays the whole season, he finishes as a wide receiver 2, as the wide receiver 18. I have him as the wide receiver 16. The hot and cold that comes with DK is why, while I'm not totally fading him, he's not off my draft board. Make no mistake. I will draft DK. I have drafted DK. I can tell you right now what my exposure is to him on Underdog Fantasy. I don't know what it is off the top of my head. I actually think I have a little bit more of him than I was maybe planning to this year. But nevertheless, I like the guys that are going ahead of him a little bit more. And there's names like Deebo Samuel going just after him. When you factor in the value or the cost, the ADP, I like a little more as well. That being said, I do have a 14% exposure to DK Metcalf on Underdog Fantasy. So that's not nothing. Generally speaking, your high watermark for any player at any position is somewhere in the 23, 24, 25% range. So 14% is not bad. Again, I'm not totally fading DK Metcalf. He's not on like my do not draft list. But there are names going just ahead of him and just before him, just before him and just after him that I like a little bit more. And so that exposure number is probably not going to creep up too much higher because of the per weekly averages, plus the fact that they drafted Jackson Smith and Jigba, and for whatever it's worth, they did add Zach Charbonnet in the backfield. They added a couple of offensive pieces to this offense. It's what gives me a little bit of pause on DK's ADP. And so while I have him listed as my wide receiver 16 and I expect a wide receiver 2 season from him, it almost feels a little lofty. And so I'm probably not going to have a ton of shares of DK. And in redraft, more so than best ball, is probably where I'm going to look elsewhere other than drafting DK Metcalf. If he falls to the end of the third round, yeah, I'll roll the dice. But if he goes top of the third round near the 2-3 turn, I'm probably going to be out. The weekly averages make me a little bit of concern, give me a little bit of pause when you factor in the pieces that Seattle added through the draft. But played all 17 last year, gave you some pretty decent production. So I'll give him my wide receiver 16 overall ranking. My wide receiver 17 for the 2023 season, this is where I have Calvin Ridley. Now, obviously, we can't look at any statistics prior to halfway through the 2021 season on Calvin Ridley. So I guess I'm kind of grouping myself in with the consensus on where he's getting drafted and just kind of hoping on what he has done in the past. And what he has done in the past, now this is with a good Falcons offense that was a high-octane passing offense. He put up wide receiver 1 numbers playing with Julio Jones before Julio Jones started to fall off at the tail end of his career. Nevertheless, we know what we're getting with Calvin Ridley, an outstanding route runner, has a nose for the end zone. I think in the last full season he played, he caught 10 touchdowns. Is a dark horse to lead the NFL in receiving yards, or he was at least during his days in Atlanta. Now he gets a fresh start in Jacksonville. He gets to catch passes from Trevor Lawrence. We presumably expect he will ascend to the wide receiver 1 spot over Christian Kirk, which gives him a lot of upside and a lot of reason to be enticed by Calvin Ridley. We just can't sit here, any of us, and definitively know today what are we going to get from Calvin Ridley because we haven't seen him play for 18 months, right? He stepped away during the 2021 season, presumably due to some mental health issues, and he penned, I guess an article is what you can call it, for the Players Tribune. I'm sure if you guys are familiar with the Players Tribune, earlier this offseason, Calvin Ridley penned a whole kind of I don't know what you call them. It's not an article, but just kind of, he gave you his backstory, so to speak, as far as how much he's willing to give to the public anyway, as far as how much information he's willing to release. And I'm paraphrasing here. I'm not going to try to quote him on it, but I did read the article. First of all, it just makes you root for Calvin Ridley. But it sounds like, if I'm remembering correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody's more familiar with it than I am, but it sounds like Ridley was at some point in a somewhat dark place, or in a bad place. Probably mentally, possibly psychologically, however you want to quantify it or label it. It sounded like Calvin Ridley was really going through some stuff during the 2021 season. And then, of course, infamously, he was suspended for the 2022 season for gambling on the Falcons. It was reportedly not more than $1,500, which is probably the equivalent of $5 for Calvin Ridley. Nevertheless, he got caught. Whether you agree on how the NFL, punishes players based on whatever the activity is or whatever the situation is, they suspend him for a year. We don't see him for 2022. During the 2022 season, the Falcons trade Calvin Ridley to the Jaguars. And now, again, he ascends probably to the top of the depth chart, catching passes from Trevor Lawrence, who I think a lot of people are expecting to have a really strong season this year in his third year in the NFL with his best collection of talent on offense since his rookie year. Calvin Ridley on one side, Christian Kirk probably in the slot, Zay Jones on the other side. Evan Ingram gets locked up to a 3-year extension as his tight end. He's got Travis Etienne and now Tank Bigsby in the backfield. Bigsby has been making some waves in OTAs and all that good stuff. All this to say, I think expectations are high for the Jaguars offense as a whole. Ridley's going to be at the center of that as far as the passing game goes. So some of this is speculation. Some of this is just pulling from past performances from Calvin Ridley and what we know from him during his days in Atlanta. His ADP is, I think, around 32 on Underdog Fantasy. We're just going to double check that for everybody. I should have had this pulled up already. Yeah, 32 on the nose. I'm doing way too many drafts. 32 on the nose, so you got to draft him probably by the middle of the third round if you want Calvin Ridley on your team. And then, honestly, Trevor Lawrence is a very easy stack to create with Calvin Ridley and or Christian Kirk, but that's another story. Clearly, the expectations are there for Ridley to produce. He does have dark horse wide receiver 1 upside. I couldn't rank him higher than this, though, just because we, again, have not seen him for 18 months. But it sounds like the expectations have returned. The upside with this Jaguars passing attack is there, and Ridley is a big part of that and a big reason why. We'll see what he can do. Hopefully, he's able to play a full 17. Hopefully, he's able to get back to the Calvin Ridley that we saw in Atlanta. Again, if you read what he penned in the Players Tribune, I don't care what team you root for. It makes you root for Calvin Ridley. I came out of that. I finished the entire thing. We live in a day and age where our attention spans are so easily, soaked up within a couple of minutes. I don't know people who finish articles anymore. They read the headline, they skim the first couple of paragraphs, and then they develop their opinion from that. And when I say the first couple of paragraphs, that's if the writer is lucky. I'm also, prone to that as well. I know that I've done that as well. I read the whole thing. It was what's the word? It was gripping. It grabbed me. Like the article grabbed me. I was like, I need to keep reading this. I want to keep reading this. It makes you want to root for Calvin Ridley. We know the talent that he has. 32 ADP overall. It's certainly possible that that's 10 spots higher next year. But for now, we'll put him as the wide receiver 17. I think that's fair. Labeling them as like a mid-level wide receiver 2 after 18 months off. Maybe the first couple of weeks he's a little rusty. If you draft him in the 3rd round or the 4th round, he's going to be in your starting lineup. Maybe temper expectations for the first couple of weeks. Maybe. But clearly expectations on the whole are there when a guy has an ADP like that, even though he hasn't played for a year and a half. Calvin Ridley's my wide receiver 17. If of any of the wide receivers ranked in this range, he would be the one that I say has the best shot to crack into the top 10 when it's all said and done at the end of the season. So we'll see. My wide receiver 18, all these guys are in this same range. I'm not breaking too much from the consensus. Not yet. Or I don't think in general I am. But my wide receiver 18 for the 2023 season is Amari Cooper. Deshaun Watson's clear top target. Deshaun Watson gets a full normal offseason this year. Will be participating in training camp, will be ready to go from the jump week 1. And he's got his number 1 wide receiver to lean on. It's a pretty damn good one, too. Amari Cooper actually finished as a wide receiver 1 on the season last year. Uh, I think it certainly helped that he was absolutely pepped with targets by Jacoby Brissett. This ranking almost as a result maybe feels a little disrespectful to Amari Cooper, because not only was he the wide receiver 9 on the season, he was the wide receiver 16 in fantasy points per game. Amari Cooper is just a damn good wide receiver. He's just really good at what he's supposed to be at. For lack of being able to verbalize that better. Had a couple of dud weeks early in the season. 3.2 half PPR points scored week 1, 1.4 half PPR points scored week 4, excuse me. Other than that, up into his bye week, Amari Cooper killed it for you. 20.6 half PPR points week 2, 19.6 week 3, 17.1 half PPR points week 5, 12.4 week 6, 8.9 week 7, 20.6 week 8. Week 9 was the bye week. So in the first 8 weeks of the season, Amari Cooper gave you more than 15 points in 4 of those games. And then another game with 12 and another game with almost 9. So, meh, but also didn't totally kill you. So only 2 bad weeks in the first 8 weeks for Amari Cooper. 4.7 in week 10, not great. Then he had his best performance of the season, 27.3 in week 11, 12.9 week 12, and then I think this is when Deshaun Watson came back. So 6 points week 13, 5.2 points week 14, 7.8 points week 15, 10.2 points week 16. He blew up week 17, 24 half PPR points. So if you got the championship week, despite Amari Cooper giving you some duds from weeks 13 to 16, not that 10.2 is a bad score in week 16, but 6, 5.2, and 7.8 weeks 13 to 15, obviously not very good. But if you got to week 17 with Amari Cooper, there's a decent chance he helped you win the whole thing. 24 points week 17. And then 6.1 for those of you who still play fantasy championships in week 18 or the last week of the season. So his production went down because Deshaun Watson came back, and like Calvin Ridley, although for very different reasons, Deshaun Watson hadn't played football in a year and a half. So there was rust to knock off, right? So again, let me just really quick go back again. Why they didn't play football, two entirely different things, or 2 entirely different reasons. But nevertheless, Calvin Ridley, Deshaun Watson haven't played football for 18 months. Don't be surprised. I'm not predicting anything, but don't be surprised if Calvin Ridley is a little rusty out of the gate. And if you draft Calvin Ridley, don't lose hope. Don't sell low. Somebody might try to snake their way in and offer you some lowball offer in week 4 or 5 if Calvin Ridley doesn't get off to a blazing hot start. I can tell you right now, I will reject any such potential trade offer. So don't be surprised. Guys who have a long layoff from football for whatever reason could be a little rusty in their first couple of weeks back. We saw that happen with Deshaun Watson, and Amari Cooper's numbers suffered as a result. 6 in week 13, 5.2 week 14, 7.8 week 15, 10.2 week 16. But then he blew up in week 17 to give you a little bit of a reminder that not only is Amari Cooper that dude, but we expect Deshaun Watson to be, at least from a production perspective, if not on the actual field, a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. Now the rust should be gone. It's been a normal offseason for Deshaun Watson, the first one in like 3 years. Normal going into training camp. He'll take all the QB1 reps, obviously. He'll play the whatever preseason reps he gets, obviously, and he's going to be the week 1 starter through the rest of the season. So that type of consistency, plus knocking the rust off for Deshaun Watson, should be great news for Amari Cooper. That's a guy I want at his ADP. What is it, 35-ish, I think, is where he's going. No, 33. He's actually going one spot below Calvin Ridley. He's going one spot ahead of Deebo Samuel. I do like Deebo just a little bit more. Obviously, I rank Deebo as my wide receiver 15, and Amari I've got down as my wide receiver 18. Nevertheless, I think this is a pretty good value for Amari Cooper, and I think you should be pouncing on that. Deshaun Watson is, however you want to slice it, once he knocks the rust off, Deshaun Watson is a better quarterback than Jacoby Brissett. Yes, they added Elijah Moore via trade. They drafted Cedric Tillman in the 3rd round. So they added to this wide receiver core. But with all due respect to Elijah Moore, and I feel good about his prospects this year as well, Amari Cooper is that team's top option, that top wide receiver for this Browns offense. And on top of that, for whatever it's worth, Kareem Hunt has not been brought back. He was the pass catching back. You don't typically compare wide receiver targets to running back targets, but those targets got to go somewhere. Who's to say that the team's wide receiver 1 can't pick up a couple more of them? I like Amari Cooper a lot. This wide receiver 18 ranking almost feels a little bit disrespectful. That being said, with an ADP of around 33, I would take him 3-4 spots above to make sure I secure him. And it's not a difficult stack to build with Deshaun Watson, whose ADP has settled into the 80s. I think it's around 83 or 84. I like Amari Cooper a lot. ADP of 33 is not too expensive for a guy who you can expect to put up an average probably of 13, 14 fantasy points per week. Amari Cooper's my wide receiver 18. It almost feels like I'm doing him a little bit of a disservice with this ranking. I like him where I can draft him, and I am drafting him. Am I hating on the Browns? I don't think I'm hating on the Browns. Or did I have Amari a little too low for you? Okay, you have him at 16. I'm at 18. I mean, I don't think I'm too far down on him. I like Deebo because I do expect the 49ers offense to be a little bit more dynamic. Honestly, it's not it's not crazy to like guys again like Calvin Ridley and Amari Cooper over DK Metcalf. If you think Seattle's offense is going to be good, and wheels up on Geno Smith, by the way, that's because of all of the parts that they have in addition to DK Metcalf. Jackson Smith and Jigba, was the consensus top wide receiver drafted, or in the NFL draft, was the consensus wide receiver coming out this past year. We expect big things from him in the NFL. Tyler Lockett is still criminally underrated every single year. And they've got it's a very intriguing backfield, Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. This offense in Seattle should be really good, but that could come at the expense of per weekly production from DK Metcalf. So if you want to have Metcalf a little lower in your rankings, I'm not going to fight you on that. I gave it to him the wide receiver 16 spot out of respect for the fact that he played 17 last year. But the per weekly average was not as good as the final finish appeared to be. But no, I like Amari Cooper a lot. I almost prefer a guy like him in his position over the top receiver in what we expect to be a really good offense, because Deshaun Watson should key on him. He should key on Amari Cooper. And that's no disrespect to David Njoku or Elijah Moore, but Amari Cooper is top dog, I would say, by a larger margin than, say, DK Metcalf is over Tyler Lockett and Jackson Smith and Jigba. And I like David Njoku, by the way, as like a kind of a hedge at the tight end position. You're not going top heavy and you're not punting. You're taking a guy 95, 100 picks into a draft. I certainly like Njoku a lot. Again, Deshaun Watson should just bolster this offense as a whole. But for me, Cooper is far and away the top option in the passing game for this offense. He should be peppered with targets once again. So I almost feel like I need to have him a little higher than wide receiver 18. He should be in for a strong season. My wide receiver 19, I think he's the wide receiver 20 on Underdog Fantasy. He's got an ADP of around 39. And he's a guy I'm happy to reach on by a couple of spots as well. My wide receiver 19 is Jerry Jeudy. 67 catches last year, 972 yards, 6 touchdowns scored on an abysmal offense, right? The Broncos were bad last year. Russell Wilson was bad last year. Nathaniel Hackett was giving off does not belong vibes as a head coach last year. Now he's the offensive coordinator with the Jets because Aaron Rodgers loves Nathaniel Hackett back from their time in Green Bay. Good for Nathaniel Hackett. But the Broncos were an absolute train wreck last year from the jump, from the start. And yet Jerry Jeudy still was able to put together a decent season with Russ playing absolutely terribly. Well, excuse me. Just looking at the finish last year for Jeudy, he did finish as the wide receiver 21. So giving him a wide receiver 19 spot, up a couple spots from his finish last year. The production was there, man. He was pretty consistent again on what was a very bad offense. And on a per weekly basis, he was he was mostly fine. He cracked the top 24. I think he was the wide receiver 21 on the season. He was the wide receiver 22 in fantasy points per game. That means he was pretty consistent. $18.2 half PPR fantasy points in week 1. He got off to a great start. And then he went in the tank. Just as I say, he was consistent. Weeks 2 and 3 were not good. 1.7 and 2.7 in weeks 2 and 3. That's not going to get it done. Not good. 13.3 points week 4, 6.8 and 6.9 weeks 5 and 6. Not very good. I think this was honestly around the time where I bought low on him in my redraft league. That was I didn't draft a good team overall, but I did win a trade. So sometimes you just take the small victories. I think I traded Aaron Jones. I acquired Aaron Jones and Jerry Jeudy last year for Mike Williams and Melvin Gordon. And like the very next week, Mike Williams got hurt. And like 3 weeks later, Melvin Gordon got cut by the Broncos. So I won that trade, and my team missed the playoffs anyway. Anyway, Jerry Jeudy. After a 6-week stretch where he only had 2 games over double-digit half PPR scoring. 4 out of his first 6 games were not good. It got better, though. 13.1 in week 7, 15.3 in week 8. They had their week 9 bye. Week 10, he got hurt. Didn't record a catch, didn't pick anything up in the form of production. He got hurt early in that game, missed the next 2 weeks. That's just one of those, what are you going to do, right? That's just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. Sometimes we fire up players into our starting lineup and they get hurt early on. That's the nature of the beast. So goose egg week 10, missed week 11 and week 12 due to the injury. But then he came back and he did just fine. 8.5 points week 13, 29.3 week 14, 11.1 week 15, 14.7 week 16. He didn't help you championship week very much. Only 7.3 points scored week 17. But he had a great week 18 for anybody who had their championship week in week 18. 21.8 half PPR points scored for an average of 11.4 on the season. Again, finished as a wide receiver 2 overall. Finished as a wide receiver 2 in fantasy points per game on the lower end. But now we got Sean Payton in as head coach instead of Nathaniel Hackett. We expect him to take this reclamation project and make the Broncos offense better than what it was last year, which shouldn't be very difficult because they were putrid. Again, Jeudy put up these numbers in an abysmal offense, one that we expect to be better this year. Right? I think it's fair to say he blew Cortland Sutton out of the water as far as the Broncos wide receiver that you prefer. If you guys remember last year, I was the one touting Jerry Jeudy over Cortland Sutton. That's neither here nor there. I like him a lot this year. I'm happy to draft him late third, early fourth round. If he falls to me in the fourth round, I am hammering that every single time. I don't care what the roster construction is of my team thus far up to that point. I'm high on Jerry Jeudy. I'm high on the talent. What I can't sit here and definitively tell you is Russell Wilson cooked? Does he have another season in him? Can he get back to even 65 or 70% of what he was in Seattle? That remains to be seen. Maybe that's asking a little much, but I got to imagine Sean Payton doesn't take this job if he doesn't feel like he can squeeze more out of this offense going into 2022. They should just be better by the nature of the NFL, the ebb and flow of the NFL. Sometimes you're bad, the very next year you're good. Sean Payton is a great offensive mind. He has stamped his legacy in the NFL as one of the great offensive gurus as a head coach. Having a Hall of Fame quarterback in Drew Brees in New Orleans certainly helps with that, but they had a long, sustained track record of success in New Orleans, and specifically on offense. I think he went to Denver, and he's going to be able to maybe not replicate some of those Saints numbers, but they're going to be better than they were last year. And with Jerry Jeudy as the top dog, as the clear-cut top wide receiver in that offense, I expect him to have an upper echelon wide receiver 2 season. He should be able to crack into the top 15, or he should be able to flirt with cracking into the top 15 at the very least. I think as long as he stays healthy, a top 20 season is a lock. And I think he's got top 15 upside on the season. And I do believe he's got high-end wide receiver 2 upside on a per weekly basis. I think he can improve on all of these numbers and finish better than the wide receiver 21 overall. The last piece of information here is that it was being rumored earlier in the offseason that the Broncos might be shopping one of their wide receivers. Seems pretty obvious now at this point that that player was Sutton, not Jeudy. I can't imagine they were happy with the asking price, and therefore Sutton is still on the roster. They drafted Marvin Mims in the second round of the draft. I think it was the second round of the draft. It was like 52nd overall. They drafted Marvin Mims. I think that's a Sutton replacement, not a Jeudy replacement. Maybe not just yet, but down the line, long term. Jeudy is this team's wide receiver 1. I expect him to have a really strong season. I have him as my wide receiver 19, and I've got the arrow pointing up on him. I am drafting Jeudy when I can, especially if he falls to me like early 4th round. I'm doing that every single time. I really like Jeudy this year relative to cost. My wide receiver 20 is Keenan Allen. And this is I guess, a combination of 2 things. Obviously, it's a respect thing for what Keenan Allen has done in his career, which is pretty much just put up low-end wide receiver 1 numbers when he's on the field. And I expect this Chargers offense to be a lot better than it was last year. In week 2 last year, Justin Herbert broke his ribs. Dealt with that for at least the first half of the season, if not a little bit longer. Keenan Allen got hurt, I think, week 1. Missed a ton of time. Mike Williams, not right away, but later on the season, got hurt, missed a month. Their left tackle, Rashawn Slater, did he go down week 1 last year or very early? Was it even in training camp? Feel free to, fact check me on that one. But the Chargers lost their starting left tackle, Rashawn Slater, very early in the season. That's going to affect the whole offense, right? The trickle-down effect of losing a stud offensive lineman is going to have bigger ripple effects than, what an offensive lineman puts on the stat sheet. That's Justin Herbert's blind side. Justin Herbert's blind side was being protected by a backup when Herbert was dealing with broken ribs. It's no wonder their offense was really inconsistent last year. Allen had 8.6 half PPR points in week 1. Man, he was cruising. He was cruising. And then he picks up the injury. Misses the next 5 weeks. Week 2, week 3, week 4, week 5, week 6, he's out. He tries to return week 7, re-aggravates, gets injured again, exits the game early. Chargers bye week is week 8, and then he misses the next 2 weeks as well, weeks 9 and weeks 10. Weeks 9 and 10, excuse me. So basically, Keenan Allen had about 10 half PPR points total in the first 10 weeks of the season because he picked up an injury week 1. He comes back week 11 and lights it up, or at least he was rock solid. You were able to rely on him for the rest of the season. 9.9 half PPR points in his return, week 11. 13.4 half PPR points, week 12. 17.8, week 13. 15.2, week 14. 12.6, week 15. 15.9, week 16. Championship week, he hurt you a little bit. 9.3 half PPR points, week 17. Not very good, but you were doing cartwheels and backflips if you had a week 18 championship week and Keenan Allen was in your lineup. 26.2 half PPR points for his best by far performance of the season. Obviously, in very limited action, Keenan Allen finished, you guessed it, once again as a low-end wide receiver 1 in fantasy points per game. This is what he does. This is what Keenan Allen does. He is a low-end wide receiver 1, and now you can have him 34, 35 picks into a draft. I'll say it right now, I don't have enough shares of Keenan Allen. I wish I had more. It's fair to be a little concerned about him, right? He has had his share of injury issues. Newsflash, it's the NFL. He's 31 years old, so he's that advanced age in the NFL. And it's a what have you done for me lately type of league. But once again, even though the sample size was slightly less last year compared to if he had been able to play more games, Keenan Allen, he finished as the wide receiver 42 because he missed 8 weeks and got hurt in 2 others. He exited week 1 early and he exited week 7 early, and then he missed 7 games in total, or as a whole overall. But in the games that he did play, it was good enough for him to end up as a low-end wide receiver 1 on a per game average. That's all this dude does is put up low-end wide receiver 1 numbers. You can have him this year at the very affordable price with an ADP of 35.7. And that, of course, that ADP bakes in already the concern of him getting hurt. You're not breaking the bank drafting Keenan Allen 36th overall. Did they lose their center too? I might have missed that one. But yeah, the Chargers were a wreck last year because of injuries, not because they're bad. Well, they blew that 27-point lead in the playoffs. But the fact that they made the playoffs at all, I think people are focusing too much on the fact that, and I'm not a Chargers fan, by the way, people are focusing too much on the fact that they blew a big lead in the playoffs and not enough on the fact that they should have never made the playoffs to begin with, given all of those things that happened to them. This Chargers offense should be a lot better this year than they were last year. Now, I will say, just as a caveat, I'm a little concerned about Austin Eckler's workload, But that's a conversation for another day, and I still listed Eckler as my running back 3 for the season. I have a little small concern, but even then, you still expect Eckler to have a top 5 finish at the position. I bring this up because Justin Herbert was checking it down to Eckler a million times last year. I think he finished with a career high in receptions. He went over 100, Eckler did. He's not going to catch 100 balls again because Keenan Allen, or you expect at least, we don't project injuries. We don't project missed time when doing fantasy football projections. We expect Keenan Allen back and not to miss 7 games, and we expect Mike Williams back and not to miss, he missed 4 or 5, maybe more games himself. And they have Rashawn Slater back, and Justin Herbert is not coming into this season with broken ribs. The consensus is sleeping on the Chargers, people. Take advantage of their ADPs. It starts with Keenan Allen with an ADP of 36. I have him as my wide receiver 20. I feel like I'm talking myself into ranking him higher. Do yourself a solid and finish your drafts walking away with having drafted Keenan Allen. He's my wide receiver 20 overall. You can get a guy who gives you low-end wide receiver 1 upside any given year. 35 picks into your draft. Sounds good to me. By the way, draft Justin Herbert too. His ADP is like in the 50s in one quarterback leagues, 55, 56. His price is down too, even though he played through broken ribs last year. Yeah, I'm betting on the Chargers to be a much better offense this year. All right, I got 4 more guys for my wide receiver 2s, wide receivers 13 to 24. Appreciate you guys coming in and hanging out today. Real quick, just an FYI, I will be off from live streaming next week. I will be traveling for work, but I will continue to get videos pumped out. I'm going to be, during that time off, I'm going to start putting my draft plan together. My All-Pro members, for anybody who's got an All-Pro membership, you will be receiving that early. I'm hoping within the next 7 to 10 days. Everybody else, I will release that to y'all. The goal is the second week of August. So just FYI, that's where I'll be next week. I'll be in the lab. I will not be available for live streams because I got to travel, but I will be in the lab working on some stuff for you guys behind the scenes, and I'll continue to get videos pumped out as well. My wide receiver 21. Now, it's a limited sample size that we're going off of, but the thought process with wide receivers, it used to be third-year breakouts, right? That doesn't feel like the case anymore. These guys, more and more, are coming into the NFL already ready to produce and contribute, at least dudes with high draft capital. It's not so much a third-year breakout. It's more like a second-year breakout. And I expect that this year from Christian Watson, who I have as my wide receiver 21. Now, again, the sample size is incredibly limited. Watson was not a factor for the first half of the season. He was always being billed as a project going into the NFL draft. And that turned out to be the case again for the first half of the season. He wasn't really doing a whole lot. I think he maybe, did he miss some games? I need to go back and check that. He missed a couple. He missed 3 games. He missed week 3. He didn't play week 7. He didn't play week 6, didn't play week 7, and he had some incredibly low outputs the first couple of weeks that he did play. So that turned out to come to fruition. The comments and suggestions and the analysis that he was a project, for the first half of the season, that was true. We didn't really see much of Christian Watson. But we all know what happened in the second half of the season. There was a 4-game stretch that is essentially what put him in this spot. So it's a small sample size to go off of, but it's a tantalizing one. Let me start from the beginning. Weeks 1 through 9 was a whole lot of nothing for Christian Watson. He was on your bench every single week, without a shadow of a doubt. Week 1, 5 points. I don't know if some of you remember. I don't know why. It's funny how like certain things stick out to you from the season before and you don't understand why, but they do. Week 1 last year, they cut to it on red zone. Aaron Rodgers threw a deep pass. Watson was the target, and I think it went like right through his hands, right? He went to go catch it, and it just dropped right to the ground. And it was just like, holy crap. Oh my God, that sucks. He didn't make that play. What the hell, Christian Watson? Does anybody remember that? It's funny how these like random, even non-plays stick out in your mind. That was like the most almost play I can remember from last year. And again, the lack of production followed. 5.1 half PPR points week 1, 2.4 week 2. He didn't play week 3, 8.8 week 4. A little bit better, right? Relative to expectation, a little bit better. 8.8 for a guy who wasn't starting for anybody last year. But then week 5, 0.3, which I guess was one catch for -2 yards. Or maybe he had like a 3-yard rush. I don't know what the specific statistic was. Regardless, it doesn't matter. It's not a usable thing. The guy was not playable from a fantasy purpose for the first 9 weeks of the season. The literal first half of the season. And then, I guess something clicked. Week 10, 30.7 points. Was that the Cowboys game where he scored 3 touchdowns? It must have been. And they followed it up. 19 points week 11, 19 points week 12, 22.9 points week 13. The bye week came at the absolute worst time for Christian Watson because it might have killed his momentum a little bit. Week 14 bye, he probably wishes that they had played that week because he was on an absolute heater. Was that the best 4-game stretch from a fantasy perspective that any receiver put together last year? It might have been. As far as consistent back-to-back, DeVonta Adams had, I think DeVonta Adams might have had a better stretch than that. But it was up there as far as like one of the top 4-game stretches a receiver had last year. Anyway, for the fantasy playoffs, by that point, you're firing him up. Unfortunately, he didn't deliver. 6.6 points week 15, 7.9 points week 16, championship week, 1.6 points. So he went back to being cold. Week 18, he bounced back, had 14.1 half PPR points in Aaron Rodgers' final game as a Packer. Finished as the wide receiver 35 on the season. We're not going to put a whole lot of stock into that because obviously it was ballooned by that 4-game stretch. Finished as a wide receiver 3 on the season. Finished as a wide receiver 3 in fantasy points per game. So why are we ranking him as a wide receiver 2 based on the backs of a 4-game stretch? Well, for one, Allen Lazard is gone. And I think it's fair to say we expect Christian Watson to be the far and away top target in this offense, with all due respect to Romeo Doubs and Jaden Reed, who they drafted in the 2nd round. Christian Watson should get 150 targets this year. And so, I mean, maybe not that, but like 130, I would say. 120 at least. 120 should be his floor for targets. So number one, you want to follow the volume. Whether it's quality volume or not, you want to follow the volume. Number 2, the general talent overall. This dude is a burner. He's faster than most of the guys on the field. And with his size and his speed, he should be able to throw in some house calls more than a couple of times this season. More consistently than he did as a rookie. He's now got the NFL seasoning of a year of experience under his belt. He's the unquestioned wide receiver 1 for the Packers. Jordan Love remains a big question mark. We know this. But Jordan Love, I mean, we saw it on Monday night against the Eagles when Jordan Love had to go in for an injured Aaron Rodgers. Jordan Love doesn't have to be special for Christian Watson to be special. Y'all know the play that I'm talking about. It was just like a simple crossing route. Watson's just running across the middle. Love flips it to him. Watson catches it, runs up the left side of the field for what? Like a 60-some-odd yard house call. Outran like at least 3 Eagles defensive backs. Jordan Love does not have to be a Hall of Fame quarterback for Christian Watson to put up big numbers for the Packers this year. The side speed combination is awesome, is tantalizing. Alan Lazard is gone for whatever it's worth. Randall Cobb and Robert Tonyan are also gone. That's just more targets that are available. Yeah, they drafted Jaden Reed. Okay. I think he could be maybe a decent PPR guy. This passing game, this passing offense starts with Christian Watson. The volume should be there. The big plays we know are there. We know are something he's capable of. And sometimes with these rankings, with where these guys get drafted, we're charting the potential breakout before it actually happens. This feels like the guy this year. Yes, the sample size is small. We're basically banking on that 4-game sample size coming to fruition for more consistency over the course of the season. I'm buying the hype. I think you should too. Christian Watson, wide receiver 21 for the 2023 season. My wide receiver 22. Again, some of these guys I understand if you feel a little funny about because their quarterback situation is very much a question mark. But we've seen this guy produce with bad quarterback play before, and I'm not going to stop now. I got Terry McLaurin here as my wide receiver 22. McLaurin finished as the wide receiver 14 last year. He finished as a wide receiver 2 in fantasy points per game, but he was available. He was available for you every single week. He played all 17, so that obviously boosted his wide receiver 14 finish, but he was closer to a low-end wide receiver 2 in fantasy points per game. Now he has yet another quarterback to learn from and have to build some chemistry with or build a rapport with. There's been absolutely no consistency at the quarterback position for Terry McLaurin's career. It is criminal. I think Terry McLaurin has been potentially gypped out of greater production in his career as a result of Washington's incompetence at the quarterback position and being able to find one. There is certainly hope this year that they've found that guy in Sam Howell, who I think was a 5th-round pick for them last year. That remains, of course, to be seen. He put up a decent performance. When did he play last year? Was it week 17 or 18? I think it was week 18 that Sam Howell was able to get in there. Put a decent little performance together. That's one game. We'll see. Nevertheless, Terry McLaurin gives you some pretty rock-solid, if not inspiring production. He gives you rock-solid, consistent production. 12.8 points week 1, 10.2 points week 2, 13.2 points week 3. He had a bad week 4, 2.5 points. Not good. 10.1 points week 5, 6.7 week 6, meh. 15.8 points week 7, 13.6 points week 8, 8.1 week 9, 16.8 week 10, 7.6 and 7.3 respectively in weeks 11 and 12. 20.5 points week 13 before his week 14 bye week. A lot of these numbers, so he only hit 20 points once. He only went over 15 points 2 other times. But he's given you double-digit scoring 75% of the time. Okay, maybe it's more like 70% of the time. But still, that's because his quarterback play is difficult to trust. Terry McLaurin is not the difficult one to trust in this Washington offense. It's whoever's been under center for him over the course of his career. This is rock solid production for a guy who has played with what? How many guys? Case Keenum, Taylor Heineke, Carson Wentz, Ryan Fitzpatrick. Who the hell else? Not Jacoby Brissett. He's playing there for the first time this year. Now Sam Howell. It's probably like one or two random guys I'm missing in there. And he still gives you wide receiver 2 numbers. After the bye week, week 15, 10 points. Week 16, 15.7 points. Championship week, he hurt you. 4.7 points. Not good. I feel like I'm naming a lot of wide receivers who busted week 17. They did not show up for you week 17. Unless you had like Mike Evans. Remember that game? Didn't do anything all year and then cooked the Panthers for 3 touchdowns. And then he finished the season, week 18, 14.9 points. This is just Terry McLaurin's, week per week performance. It's not slate busting. It's not week winning, but he gives you that rock solid, consistent production that just you can rely on more weeks than not. A lot of people are excited about Jahan Dotson and what he potentially brings in his second year in the offense. I am too. I like Dotson. Eric Bieniemy comes over from Kansas City as the offensive coordinator. We're obviously, everyone's interested to see, can he keep that momentum going from his success in Kansas City? Or was that just Andy Reid's offense and Patrick Mahomes playing quarterback? Nevertheless, there's been a lot of people that have felt in NFL circles that Eric Bieniemy has deserved an opportunity for a couple of years now. He gets to call the shots as his, as the offensive coordinator, as the offensive mind, as the head offensive mind on the coaching staff for the first time. Let's see what he can do. Got a couple intriguing names in the backfield with Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson. I'm drafting both of those guys too, by the way, for whatever it's worth. But Terry McLaurin, whatever the hype is around Jahan Dotson, which is fair, Terry McLaurin is still that team's wide receiver 1, will continue to operate as that team's wide receiver 1. No, he's not going to give you fantasy wide receiver 1 production as long as the quarterback carousel continues, but he is a dude that he won't lose you a week. More weeks than not. He will give you the double-digit scoring that you need to bolster your team's floor. To that point, he's the type of guy that I'm not crazy about drafting in best ball, but I want in redraft. I don't have a ton of shares of Terry McLaurin in best ball. That's not going to change because in best ball, you want to play for the upside. Like best ball, Christian Watson or Terry McLaurin, I want Christian Watson. Redraft, there's way more of an argument for Terry McLaurin. Feel me? Terry McLaurin is my wide receiver 22, one of the most consistent guys at the position, despite the bad quarterback play year over year. To bring it home with my final 2 wide receiver 2s. My wide receiver 23 is DJ Moore. And he's the type of dude that I wish I could find a way to rank him a little bit higher. I just can't. But like Terry McLaurin, DJ Moore has been hampered by bad quarterback play for his entire time in Carolina. And yet he still is able to put up, 80 some odd catches and 1,100 yards. He doesn't ever rank higher because he doesn't score touchdowns because he's been on bad offenses that are never in scoring position. Moore finished as the wide receiver 22 on the season, again, because he played all 17, but he was a wide receiver. He was a low-end wide receiver 3 in fantasy points per game. Again, terrible quarterback play is going to hold receivers back sometimes. 6.5 half PPR points week 1, 11.8 week 2, 2 half PPR points week 3, not good. 9.1 in week 4, 8.7 week 5, 2.2 in week 6, not good. He had a little 2-game stretch here in week 7 and 8, 16.1 and 24.5 half PPR points respectively. And then and then again, the ebb and flow of a bad Carolina Panthers offense is going to hurt DJ Moore. Weeks 9 through 11, 3.4, 4.9, 3.9 points. That's not going to get it done. He had 18.3 points in week 12. That's really good. Week 13 was his bye week. Came out of that with a 1-catch performance in week 14. Not good. But then he turned it on because for whatever reason, the one dude that he has had some chemistry with in his career was when Sam Darnold played. When Sam Darnold played quarterback for the Carolina Panthers, go figure, DJ Moore put up numbers. Week 15, 15.8 points. Week 16, 17.6 points. Week 17, 20.7 points. DJ Moore, there were probably a lot of teams that had DJ Moore that didn't make the playoffs. But if you were one of the teams that did have DJ Moore, made the playoffs, and you were able to suck it up and still get him into your starting lineup, either because you felt like you had no better options, he delivered for you. He showed up for you. Big time. 15.8, 17.6, 20.7, weeks 15 through 17. That'll get it done. Big time. Hopefully you didn't play a week 18 championship with him, because then he came back to earth and gave you a 1.5. Gets traded to the Chicago Bears in the offseason. I think it's fair to say we're expecting that he now officially has the best quarterback situation of his career, now catching passes from Justin Fields. We will see if that actually comes to fruition. I am a believer in Justin Fields, but we, to be fair, have not seen it just yet completely come to fruition, in part because Fields was dealing with coaching malpractice in year 1 from Matt Nagy. And then last year, it was just, in his second year, he was starting to figure it out and he was putting up big numbers on the ground. This just wasn't a very dynamic passing offense that defenses feared. Darnell Mooney did not have a good year. Cole Kmet looks like a nice tight end, but no offense to Cole Kmet, he's not a difference maker yet at the position. And then it was a hodgepodge crew behind Darnell Mooney. They traded for Chase Claypool midway through the season. That didn't really work out. They had Equinemius St. Brown. Who else? They brought over, who's that guy for Byron Pringle? They brought over from Kansas City, whatever. I mean, this was not an NFL passing offense yet that deserved any type of respect. No offense, but that's the truth. Now we have a guy that can turn that around with DJ Moore ending up in Chicago, catching passes from Justin Fields. This could be a low-volume passing offense, but DJ Moore is the unquestioned wide receiver 1. He's going to get the targets when they do throw. And for what it's worth, he helps Darnell Mooney and Cole Kmet. That's the trickle-down effect that a guy who does have wide receiver 1 upside, at least from an NFL team perspective, when that's what he brings to the table. I think DJ Moore is a top 20 wide receiver in the NFL. But we haven't seen that actually come out, end up being play out on paper yet in the form of stats, in the form of production. Hopefully it happens now on a more consistent basis now that he's in Chicago. It's a lot of wait and see, but we expect the Bears to take a step forward as an offense in year 3 for Justin Fields, now that he has a true wide receiver 1 to throw the ball to in DJ Moore. This should be a deeper, better group of pass catchers for him to work with. Fields is a dynamic playmaker all by himself. Will likely be in the top 3 for quarterback rushing yards and is the threat to be the top rusher at the position. So he's a field flipper all by himself. Fields flipper. There you go. I just thought of that myself. This offense should be better. DJ Moore should be good for Justin Fields. Justin Fields should be good for DJ Moore. I got him as my wide receiver 23. He has upside to finish better, even in a potential low-volume passing offense. What's going on, CXK? Good to see you, man. My last wide receiver 2, my wide receiver 24. Sticking with the young guys. Unfortunately, again, this is that low end part of the rankings where I think these guys are good receivers. It's just question mark after question mark with their quarterback situation. My wide receiver 24 to round out my wide receiver 2s is Drake London. I was out on Drake London as a rookie because I didn't believe in Marcus Mariota. That turned out to for the most part, be a good call. London had his weeks here and there, but for the most part, he was difficult to trust for fantasy purposes. I can't sit here and tell you today that Desmond Ridder is a significant upgrade over Marcus Mariota or an upgrade at all. We have a very small sample size to go off of, and it's not one that I can really pull anything from with Desmond Ridder. That being said, it cannot be any freaking worse than what Marcus Mariota brought for the Atlanta Falcons last year. He was abysmal. He was so bad throwing the football. Drake London's production was affected by it. Kyle Pitts' production was affected by it. There were full games where Atlanta basically abandoned the pass and just said, we're just going to run the entire game and whatever happens, happens. Maybe now that changes. Maybe now that turns around and Drake London can find a little bit more consistency and a little bit more good fortune in the form of fantasy production. He had 117 targets last year. That's the low, as the wide receiver 1, 117 targets. Talk about low volume passing offense. 72 catches, 866 yards, 4 touchdowns. That's pretty good considering the Falcons were awful throwing the football last year. Thanks, Mariota. Now London comes into year 2. Remember, he was the top overall pick in the draft. Excuse me, the top wide receiver drafted. The top overall wide receiver drafted. I think it was 8th overall. Atlanta took him. So clearly the expectations are there. The upside is there. His value is significantly depreciated relative to some of his draft mates, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, even a guy like Christian Watson, who was drafted 40-plus picks later than him because of the quarterback situation. So if you believe that Atlanta can be even a little bit, even marginally better throwing the ball than they were last year, then Drake London is a decent value. Finished as the wide receiver 36 last year, so he snuck in as a wide receiver 3, the last wide receiver 3 in 12-team leagues. But he was wide receiver 4 in fantasy points per game. And he was almost a wide receiver 5. He was a low-end wide receiver 4 in fantasy points per game. 9.9 half PPR points week 1. Pretty good, again, all things considered. 20.6 week 2. Now you're starting to think, holy crap, can Drake London be a fantasy-relevant starter for my fantasy team, even with Marcus Mariota as the quarterback? 12.9 points week 3. You were probably still firing him up after that. And then came a 5-6 game stretch where you wish you didn't. From weeks 4 to week 9, in half PPR scoring, London scored 2.7, 5.5, 5.5, 1.4, 5.1, 1.8. Blech. And then he had a nice 12.3 points in week 10, 6.7 in week 11 is not great. 3.9 in week 12 is not good. 12.5 in week 13, that's good. He was able to sprinkle in some decent performances here and there. It's just, the odds are against you when Marcus Mariota is your quarterback. Week 14 bye. And then he had a decent stretch, again, relative to what we could possibly expect from Drake London to end the season. Weeks 15 through 18, 8.5, 11.1, 7.2, finished week 18 with 15 half PPR points scored. This is a situation where we're betting on the talent. Drake London clearly proves he can do this at a high level. He just needs anybody that can play competent, that can provide competent quarterback play. We're hoping Desmond Ridder can do that at least a little bit better than what Marcus Mariota was able to provide last year. And that little 4-game stretch to end the season for London was with Desmond Ridder. So they were able to start building on their chemistry, their partnership together at the end of last season. Hopefully they can carry some of that momentum over into this offseason, into training camp, and of course into the start of the 2023 season and beyond. So again, sort of like Christian Watson, we're projecting a little bit for Drake London here. He didn't put it on the field quite yet. I don't think that's his fault. I think he was, again, victim to terrible quarterback play last year. We're expecting it to be a little bit better this year. I have him ranked as a low-end wide receiver 2, despite finishing as a low-end wide receiver 3 on the season and a low-end wide receiver 4 in fantasy points per game. The talent is there with Drake London. That's not the problem. The draft capital is there with Drake London. 8th overall pick in the 2022 draft. They invested in London. He's going to continue to operate as the team's wide receiver 1. And with marginally better quarterback play, I think a low-end wide receiver 2 season should be London's floor, and he should have upside for wide receiver 1 weeks much more frequently than the one time he did it in 2022. So give me Drake London. That is my final wide receiver 2 for the 2023 season. Again, it's a bit of a projection based not on what he did last year, but what we think he can do this year with what should be a better supporting cast. Yeah, so the guys who just miss, there's a lot of talented wide receivers, and why I'm really advocating that we hammer wide receiver in drafts this year, and we'll worry about running back later. Chris Godwin, Marquise Brown, Deontay Johnson. Who else am I forgetting? I mean, DeAndre Hopkins, hell, Mike Williams, Christian Kirk, Tyler Lockett. Again, criminally underrated every single year, even by me. Brandon Ayuk. There's a lot of really good players who just missed the cut, who I guess by the nature of the beast, I simply have to rank as wide receiver 3s. These are all dudes that can give you wide receiver 2 production, and there will be plenty of weeks where they do just that. I'm going to take a similar approach to my redraft leagues this year, you guys, to my redraft leagues, where it is get a stud wide receiver early, get a stud running back early. If you can get that stud running back, do your absolute best to ignore the other running backs that are getting drafted in rounds 3, 4, even 5. Hammer those wide receivers. There's great running back value this year. Round 7 and beyond. I think I said week 4 and 5 and 6. Rounds, like stud wide receiver and or running back. Round 1, do the opposite round 2. Stud wide receiver round 3, stud wide receiver round 4, stud wide receiver round 5. And then there's some really good options at running back that you can get much later this year. Kenneth Walker can be had 50-plus picks into a draft. Aaron Jones can be had 50-plus picks in. J.K. Dobbins can be had almost 60 picks into a draft. Cam Akers has no competition for touches in the Rams' backfield. Can be had almost 70 picks into a draft. I mean, Rachaad White, James Conner, these dudes can be had 80 picks into a draft. They should be their team's clear-cut running back 1s. Isaiah Pacheco declared himself will be ready to go for week 1. He's got an ADP of 87. I mean, if you can weather the storm with Alvin Kamara and what we expect from his suspension, he's going 95 picks into a draft. What's going on, Eric? Appreciate it. Thanks for coming in. The running back value is so good late in drafts this year. There are so many wide receivers that did not make my cut for wide receiver for top 24 rankings, but these dudes are all deserving of that potential finish at the position for the season. Like I said, Chris Godwin, I know he's catching passes from Baker Mayfield. Guess who was really good with Baker Mayfield for at least a season or two? Jarvis Landry, slot receiver. Chris Godwin lines up a ton in the slot. Baker Mayfield is not good. He should be good enough to be able to dump it off to Chris Godwin for 100 catches on the year, at least. Marquise Brown was a wide receiver 1 prior to DeAndre Hopkins coming back from suspension last year. Yes, he had a healthy Kyler Murray throwing him the football. Even if it is Colt McCoy throwing him the ball, backup quarterbacks hyper target their top targets more than the starters do. Hollywood Brown will be fine, even if it's Colt McCoy playing quarterback for the Arizona Cardinals. Deontay Johnson, y'all know by now, if you've listened to me for the past couple of years, my obsession with Deontay Johnson. That man had like 145 targets last year, and he had a statistical outlier of no touchdowns. He's not going to catch 0 scores again in 2023, and now his ADP is down into the 5th round. There are some really good names that didn't make this list. Tyler Lockett is being drafted as the wide receiver 33. He shatters that ADP every single year. And that's not tongue-in-cheek. The proof is in the stats. So even I'm sitting here underrating Tyler Lockett. He always finishes as at least a wide receiver, too. Christian Kirk, yeah, he's contending with targets now with Calvin Ridley this year, but this should be a really good passing offense in Jacksonville. Christian Kirk absolutely has wide receiver 2 upside. Mike Williams can give you a 20-point week any given week. He's a big-time playmaker. And then, of course, while we don't love the landing spot for DeAndre Hopkins in Tennessee, he's still giving you on a per-game basis when he plays. I know it's been kind of sporadic the past 2 seasons. He gives you wide receiver 1 upside on a per-weekly basis. The proof is in the pudding. There are so many good wide receivers to pick this year. 65, 70 picks into a draft. There are 36 to 40 wide receivers that you could theoretically rank as a wide receiver 2, and you wouldn't get much argument from me. I didn't even mention Jackson Smith and Jigba. Yeah, he's got to contend with a lot of talented players on that offense for targets. But this was the number 1 receiver in this draft this past draft. Jackson Smith and Jigba, that guy who racked up 1,600 yards in a full healthy season, playing alongside Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. This dude should be very good at the NFL level. He doesn't quite make the cut. I mean, Michael Pittman, I know, again, questions with the quarterback, but he was a 3rd-round pick in 1 quarterback leagues last year. Now you can have him 65 picks into a draft. And how Anthony Richardson, I know he's a project, and no disrespect to Matt Ryan, who obviously has an argument for a future has an argument as a Hall of Famer because he won an MVP and put up big passing numbers. I mean, the quarterback play for the Colts in 2023 can't be worse than what it was in 2022 when it was kind of proven that Matt Ryan was done. Now you can have Michael Pittman 30 picks cheaper than you could get him last year. I didn't even mention Mike Evans, who has literally never gone under 1,000 yards in a season for his entire career. Again, you got to put a little bit of trust into Baker Mayfield to draft Mike Evans. So, but if you like to live dangerously, then there you go, Mike Evans. And yeah, I mean, Kadarius Toney. Look, the guy, there's been a lot of inconsistency from Kadarius Toney the past couple of years. He finished the season last year with 49 half PPR points. He finished 2021 with 63 half PPR points. These are not very good finishes, but the talent is there, and theoretically, he is Patrick Mahomes' wide receiver 1. Obviously, weapon 1 is Travis Kelce. We all know this. Not taking that away from Travis Kelce. One of the best tight ends in the history of the NFL. But as far as the wide receiver room, Juju Smith-Schuster is gone. That's a lot of targets that are now vacated. And yeah, Kadarius Toney hasn't put it all together on the field yet. But if there's anybody who can pull it out of him, it's Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. So, I mean, yeah, guys, there's lots of wide receiver talent. There's lots of guys who they don't make my top 24 rankings, but damn it, there will be at least a few who finish as top 24 who didn't get ranked there today. And Eric, the Giants wide receiver 1, is Darren Waller, right? Obviously, he plays tight end, duh. But I mean, the guy who should lead that team in targets is Darren Waller. I certainly like him 80 picks into a draft. That's about where he's getting drafted, 79, 80 picks into a draft. For fantasy purposes, they have some intriguing names, but these are all dudes that are getting drafted in like the 14th or 15th round or later. I like Darius Slayton because he's free. You can get him in the 16th round. I think that's pretty damn good as far as a guy who could finish with some potential winning weeks here and there. It's going to be tough to project those weeks when they actually happen, but he's a free guy with potential big play upside. I like Paris Campbell in the 15th round or so. That's about where he's getting drafted right now. That might go a little bit higher as we get closer to the season. Yeah, their number one receiver is Darren Waller, who I do like 80 picks into a draft. But anyway, like I said, I know there's a lot of names who didn't quite make the cut. But once again, one more time, my wide receiver twos in order. T. Higgins, wide receiver 13. DeVonta Smith, wide receiver 14. Deebo Samuel, wide receiver 15. I got the arrow pointing up on him. DK Metcalf, wide receiver 16. I feel like that's a little high. Maybe I should adjust that a little bit. Calvin Ridley, wide receiver 17. Amari Cooper, wide receiver 18. Arrows trending up. Jerry Jeudy, wide receiver 19. Trending up. Keenan Allen, wide receiver 20. Trending up. Christian Watson, wide receiver 21. Terry McLaurin, wide receiver 22. DJ Moore, wide receiver 23. Drake London, wide receiver 24. And yes, Wandale will be. I guess Wandale. I mean, here's the problem with the Giants. They all project as like slot receivers, but I guess Wandale will be the first option as their number one slot receiver. I don't know who the hell lines up on the outside for the Giants. I guess Darius Slayton is one of them, and maybe Paris Campbell's the other one. Plus, they drafted Jalen Hyatt. I don't know what it means, but Sterling Shepard is coming back, I think, from injury. Who the hell knows? Yeah, it's a hodgepodge group. It'll be interesting to see what the Giants' offense looks like, especially if Saquon Barkley is holding out. It's going to be a lot of pressure on Mr. $40 million a year, Danny Dimes. I liked him at first as a quarterback value in drafts if Saquon was going to play. Well, I guess maybe he'll run a lot. I don't know. Yeah. The Giants offense has some interesting late round best ball upside in redraft. These guys probably are. There'll be waiver ads if one of them ends up standing out a few weeks into the season. You know? So there you have it. Those are my wide receiver top 24 rankings. My wide receivers 1 through 12. I did those on Tuesday. You can check out that live stream if you are so inclined. I have it time stamped, so you can skip ahead to the certain points if you care to. And of course, I'll timestamp this one as well for anybody who's coming in late and wants to get my my thoughts on each of those wide receivers. So that's going to have me winding it down for today. If there's any last minute questions, I'm happy to take them. One more time for you guys coming in late, and I appreciate everybody coming in and hanging out today as always. Thank you guys so much for the engagement. Always makes the stream more fun. I will be off from live streams next week. One more time, I'm traveling for work. So it's going to be a little difficult for me to be able to be available for live streams. I don't want to commit to that and then have to tell you guys at the last minute that I can't do it. But I will have videos out. I'll have you guys taken care of with videos throughout the week. For my All-Pro members, for any of my members in here who have the All-Pro membership, my draft plan will be coming out early for you guys, hopefully within the next 7 to 10 days. And then for anybody else, it'll be free. I'm aiming for the second week of August. I can't imagine anybody has their redraft league before then. If you do, more power to you, but that's playing with some fire. But nevertheless, the 2023 redraft draft plan will be available. I'm, again, aiming for the second week of August. For the general population, my all-pro members, you get it a couple of weeks early. So if you are interested in memberships here, you can check that out on my channel if you're not a member now. I have my 99-cent one where you get some badges. You get a few more shout-outs that I'll acknowledge if you're on the stream. The $2.99 level, if we have enough people, the $2.99 membership, I'll set up a fantasy league, and you guys can play in it. And the $2.99 membership is your entry into the league if you're interested. And then, of course, the $4.99 all pro, you get my draft plan a little bit early, in addition to, of course, all the other perks I just mentioned. But that'll do it for me tonight. Feel free to join my Discord if you are not already in there. The Discord is the second link in the description of this video. If you have any issues with the link, it should be evergreen. It should work. But of course, drop me a comment on any video if you're trying to get into the Discord, and I'll make sure I'll get you in there if you're not and would like to be. Other than that, one more time, appreciate you guys for coming in and hanging out. I will timestamp this video so that you guys can keep track of the rankings and what my thoughts are for each guy. When I get back in the first week of August, we'll do some tight end rankings. And by that point, we'll be really getting close to redraft season as a whole. The headlines and talking points will start writing themselves. Everybody have a great weekend. Have fun. Stay safe. Whatever it is. Hopefully it's fun and or relaxing. However you're spending your time. Another summer weekend. Enjoy it, y'all. Appreciate you guys. Thanks for coming in. I'll see y'all when I'm back. First week of August. Thanks, everybody.